Everyone has a sex education. Whether from school or elsewhere, we all learn about sex in one way or another. A recent survey from the National Union of Students found that the most popular way for young people to learn about sex is through friends, followed by the information provided in their school. The survey also said that just 32% of respondents felt the sex education they received in school was good. So what is being taught in schools? And what impact does that have? And where else do people go to find answers to the questions they have about sex in relationships? Most of us will have some sort of sex education provided by our school, though curriculums vary depending on where you're educated. In England, learning about the biology of sex is compulsory, but state schools can make their own plans about what else pupils are taught. As of 2009, around half of US states still provided abstinence-only sex education to their young people. I asked some students about their experiences of sex education. They tended to be educated in either the UK or the United States, and the responses highlight that even within these countries, there's significant variation in what young people are taught. At this point, it's important to stress that these are their own personal experiences and cannot be taken as representative of entire educational systems. However, it's significant that some of their attitudes reflect the findings of the NUS survey.
In middle school, they had a show come, and it was like a musical about sex education, and so that's how we were taught. And they just had characters, and they all had to deal with different issues, and then they sang songs about it, and then at the end, everyone got to ask questions.
You would sit down and you would watch a video, but the video is from the 80s, so that kind of sets the tone. And it was all about reproduction. It was just like introducing you to body parts, which is kind of fine at that age. And then we had nothing until basically it all started with like rumours of this girl who had sort of gone and had sex with someone and it wasn't like safe, and we were like 15, 16. So they brought in a group of people from like outside of school to sit us all down in our social studies and like try to teach us about safe sex. And it was kind of a thing with the condoms and the fake penis, except we were explicitly told we were not allowed to touch the condoms.
It was very basic, just sort of here are the facts. I don't remember it being too much focused on contraceptives or abstinence versus not. We were just sort of given the facts of this is what a vagina looks like, this is what a penis looks like.
We had quite a comprehensive drugs education programme, and the lady that ran it was a nurse. And the only thing I can ever remember her saying about sex was when she was talking about drinking and saying like, oh, you shouldn't drink too much because you know what can happen. In terms of like sexual health, in like my final year of school, I think we had basically like they told us about STDs. I don't remember really ever being told much about contraception, or at least like they might have told us about it, but not really told us like how to get it or like where or what to do with it or you know everything like that.
In general, throughout their health educations, those I talked to felt there were a lot of gaps. Looking back, no one feels they were taught inaccurate information, just that they weren't given a full picture.
I feel like now it's just literally the amount of stuff we weren't informed about. Mm-hmm. Like, the fact that we weren't told about different contraceptive methods really bugs me, because I'm like, they have other uses. Because obviously the pill can be used for, like, cramps and, like, regulating periods. Surely that's something that we should be told about, because it affects your body. It's not just a method of safe sex.
It wasn't so much about, like, abstinence or protection as much as, like, this is wrong to do, you shouldn't be doing it. And this is, like, said in primary school, but also in high school.
During the sexual health education to do with periods, that classes were segregated and the guys didn't get the period lesson, as it were. And I think that creates this kind of elusive time of the month that women go through that men know nothing about. I know lots of men who are a little bit scared of it and don't know what it is, and I think it would have been useful for them to be part of that.
And I don't remember ever being taught about any sort of like STIs or anything like that, which I think is something that is quite important. Because that could be something that if you've not been taught it or you've not heard about it from anyone else, you might find something or feel something and then you don't know what it is, but if you've been taught, you might think, well, I should go to the doctor or I should see a nurse or something. So we were never really taught anything about that, which was something I think we should have known.
For all of these individuals, the type of school they attended and the culture it was within influenced what was or wasn't taught to them. In one case, a parent's complaint led to the entire class being denied education. Another respondent was educated at a British school in Uruguay, where a sex psychologist was brought in to teach her and her peers about sex and relationships. She recognises that the way she was taught was unusual given the cultural context, and the experience of those in the state school system would be different.
We had classes from everything from the biology of it, or like getting your period and menopause, to discuss topics about chauvinism and prostitution, then going into like what are healthy relationships, what's an abusive relationship, would you watch pornography, would you not, why? So she made us question a lot of like social beliefs, and especially coming from Latin America, it's a very chauvinistic culture, at least that's my perspective on it. So I think she was really great at getting us debating those sort of things. As far as I know, the national program, the only aspect of it you get is the biology bit of it. So you get diseases taught to you and you get how it actually works. But you don't get a platform that you can openly debate any topic.
The span of the topics covered in these classes is remarkable. However, she did explain that LGBT relationships were not discussed in much detail, partly due to the culture within Uruguay at the time. The country has since legalised same-sex marriage, and this discussion is beginning in her old classroom. The lack of awareness regarding LGBT relationships was felt by others I spoke to. The model of the heterosexual couple in a long-term nurturing relationship was idealised. A recent government report claimed that in comprehensive schools in England, there should be no direct promotion of sexual orientation. Clearly, focusing solely on relationships between straight, cisgender people doesn't count as promoting one type of sexual orientation over any others. Additionally, those I talked to who were UK educated noted a lack of education regarding relationships. They were made aware of the physical and biological aspects of sex, but what a relationship should look like beyond that was left out. In December 2014, a petition to make sex education mandatory in Scottish schools was heard at Holyrood. Some council authorities and the country's largest teaching union are opposed to the idea. They claimed that it would be hard to implement these measures. But 90% of the respondents to the NUS survey thought that sex and relationships education should be mandatory. My own research revealed that there's room for improvement in these areas, and no one was in any doubt as to its importance. These conflicting views lead to more questions. Whose job is it to teach young people about sex? Exactly what should they be told, and at what age? How can different cultural perspectives be accommodated in the classroom? Confronting these questions is key if young people feel they're being shortchanged by the current state of sex education in schools. In the absence of school-mandated information on sex and relationships, young people will simply find information elsewhere. We'll hear more from my interviewees as I go on to explore how the media plays a role in teaching us about sex and relationships. There has been much conversation in recent years about how the media impacts individuals. From violence in video games to a lack of diverse race representation on screen. Given the problems we have across our society today, it's easy to see a link. However, there's no consensus on the relationship between culture and the individual. For every study that shows on-screen influences in real life, another refutes those claims entirely. The Representation Project is a US-based group which examines diversity in the media. They hold that there's a link between how men and women are portrayed in the media and the roles they hold within society. This was examined in the documentary Misrepresentation, which looked specifically at women. A follow-up, looking at masculinity, has just been debuted. Are these messages accurate? What sorts of messages, specifically about sex and relationships, are conveyed in the media? And what impact does this have, if any?
I feel like I got most of my education from like 17 magazine and like reading like really cheesy like teen romance books and then moving on to rom-com movies and things like that, which I think definitely skewed my perception of it, I think.
Skins had a huge impact on quite a lot of people in our generation. Skins was barefaced and grim in its realism, and not so much the latest series, but the first series in particular. And the way that presented relationships was really interesting. It presented them as complex. It presented them as different for everyone. Our generation is perhaps the first generation that has had a candid exposition, as it were, to sex on TV, because, your watershed moments seem to be getting earlier and earlier.
Nobody was talking about sex that openly until they released Sex and the City. Okay, maybe it's portraying certain aspects of it in a different way than what you believe or what's real, but at least it got the topic going. I don't think they're that bad.
Yeah, and it's also really female, like feminist kind of thing, because it was a film about 4 females who were friends, and it was about their friendship, and it wasn't about like a husband and a wife or like men who are friends and living in the city. It was about females, which like had not been done yet until then. I feel like a lot of people forget how far we've come and what it was like just 10 or 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Well, I think that you can look at something like Sex and the City and sort of scrutinise it so much, but then you can also look at something like Girls, for example, which I feel like is, well, it's not similar to Sex and the City, but when it first came out, people were saying that it's like another it's like a younger version of Sex and the City. But after I watched a few episodes, I found that it was way more realistic portrayals of young women in sexual relationships.
There's kind of, after Game of Thrones, there seems to be a lot more, there's a move towards being more explicit. And, I don't know if people have noticed that. I mean, first season, you've got Daenerys and Drogo. Their relationship is presented kind of as, the ideal relationship. It's someone who, she's forced into marriage. Huge alarm bells ringing. On the wedding night, she's raped. She says no. And it's not brought up in the show. Then it's very Stockholm Syndrome. And, what I like is that the cast members have addressed this. And, some of the cast, if you listen to the commentaries, are like, yeah, I don't want to discuss this storyline because it's very Stockholm Syndrome in that she falls in love with him.
I think that in general, in terms of the shows that stay on, really the ones that the main character has at least 2 different love interests within 13 episodes. Yeah. And so for that to happen, there needs to be drama. That's why you want to watch it. Exactly, yeah. People watch it for the drama, and they try to relate that with their own friends, because there are some shows that they like to identify themselves, and they misinterpret, I think, who the character actually is, and remember the mistakes, but not so much the lessons learned from it.
I don't know that I've ever looked at a TV show character as either an idol or a role model.
I just
think a lot of people have, though.
Maybe. I don't think it's something I do. I don't watch much TV, to be honest, so I don't go to telly to look for things to relate to.
It's important to acknowledge what we see on screen and how it might have affected us, but it's also worth remembering that people aren't empty vessels. We are able to interact with what we take in and learn to question what we see. In the past year alone, Gone Girl has sparked conversation about the complexities of marriage. Blue is the warmest colour of how lesbian relationships are shown on screen, and TV shows like Orange is the New Black have been praised, while Game of Thrones is criticised for their depictions of sex and sexuality. It seems that as social attitudes towards sex, sexuality and relationships have changed, so have the way we can see them portrayed on screen. Dr Elisabetta Girelli is a lecturer in film studies at the University of St Andrews. She teaches a module which explores the portrayal of different sexual identities in film. I wanted to know how and why films can help us explore our attitudes towards these issues.
In terms of topics, we looked at anything that may be perceived as not sticking absolutely to the dominant social rules, or what is called heteronormative. So, for example, the first ever film with positive representations of gay men, and that is a film made in 1919 during the first 2 years of the Weimar Republic, where the government in Germany abolished all censorship. And it's an extraordinary film. It's a very earnest film, sort of showing how gay people were oppressed and they would commit suicide, and there is a thriller story in it. After this film of 1919, you have to wait till 1960 or 61, when a British film called Victim, starring Dirk Bogarde, comes out, and that is is considered a milestone. It's the film which has a major star portraying a very positive representation of a gay man, but you've got this massive gap in between. So I shouldn't start with that, and then we go to today and see what's changed. We obviously look at the representation of gay and lesbian same-sex relationship, but also we look at transgender characters. There are some fantastic films being made about them, and so the fluidity of gender, not feminine, not masculine, but something else, perhaps questioning what feminine and masculine means. We look at the representation of the sexuality of disabled people, how disability and sexuality have been seen as going or not going together, and we look at the concept of perversion. In fact, I feel that I'm always more scared about doing with the students, because I think it really freaks them out. I didn't know that it would freak them out, but I found out that it does. It's a film about necrophilia, which I admit is quite a disturbing topic. We looked not to judge, not to say, oh, it's great to be necrophilic, but to just to see how the film represented, and what do we think about it. The idea is to actually also think about things we don't normally think or that we take for granted, including, we all have an idea of what is normal, and that's probably impossible not to have, and maybe it's even right that we have it, but what do we actually mean by normal, and how normal changes throughout the times.
Dr. Girelli has also written a book on Hollywood star Montgomery Clift. He was one of a group of actors who brought a new type of masculinity to the screen after World War II. The men he played were not like the confident, hard-boiled characters of old, and audiences found it disorienting. I asked Dr. Girelli about Clift's life and work, and why it was so groundbreaking.
In terms of cinema, it was a time where, although there were still, and were very popular, these sort of traditional type of men, John Wayne, James Stewart, there was also on the rise, coming usually specifically from the theatre, from Broadway, a new bunch of male actors. Of course there were female actors, but the change seemed to be very particular about the male actors. And Clift was the first, very closely followed by actors who are more well known today, Marlon Brando and James Dean. They usually lumped together, and they were indeed friends. The thing about Clift, he was immensely successful straight away with his first film, both with the critics, and Oscar nominated straight away at the age of 26, the first film, and also adored by the public. Clift was in reality, in real life, what he defined himself as bisexual, which of course at the time meant that he had to hide a big chunk of his life in the closet. However, it was, when I say that he exemplified a new type of man, there's nothing macho about him. Even if he could be very strong and powerful, there was always a very almost morbid sensitivity about him, insecurity and so on. And also there was a sexual ambiguity about him. Then the last thing to say about Clift, which is quite important, that in 1956, when he was at the peak of his fame, I mean, really was one of the most marketable living men in Hollywood. He had a horrific car accident, which he survived by miracle, but which destroyed almost entirely his face. And it has to be said that he was an incredibly beautiful face. And although he was very revered for his acting skills, looks were very much part of his image. His face was destroyed. They put it back together, and once he absolutely didn't become an ugly man or a monster, he was never the same. He also had lots of mental and physical issues. And after that, he started to be seen as a very deviant, almost a disturbing figure in Hollywood, and he became quite an outcast, although he continued to make films, incredibly interesting films, but he went more and more far away from his initial image of this incredibly beautiful heartthrob. the first film he made, a film called Red River, directed by Howard Hawks, he starred against John Wayne. When I say against, not just because they were the main two stars, of course Clift was completely unknown, but they are made to really symbolize different types of masculinity. John Wayne, who usually plays this very one-sided, you could say, sort of a macho type, is playing this to an almost psychotic extreme. He's a really brutal man, whilst Clift plays a cowboy like Wayne, but he's he's a brave guy, but he's also very soft inside. This film was particularly interesting because it showed some aspects of Clift which would define his screen persona. Clift, in the film, there is the usual heterosexual romance. There is this woman who is liked, fancied by both John Wayne and Clift and becomes Clift's girlfriend. But there is also a very strong homoerotic current in some way between John Wayne and Clift, but certainly between Clift and an actor called John Ireland. And as it happens, the two had an affair on set, and John Wayne wanted to kick them out. Something very, very striking about Clift, and especially the way he's introduced for the first time in the film, is that he does what audiences in those days would have been used to expect a woman to do. A woman generalizing, no matter how witty or interesting was in a film, tended to be the object of desire, and she was treated by the camera that way. She was there to be looked at, and very often the actors would play this, which would expose herself as if to say, look at me. Clift did that. And that is not something which men used to do on screen. And so there was a sort of self-reveling in his own good looks that was quite shocking, I think. This happens not necessarily in scenes in which he was with his female love interest, but he took this attitude when he was with men. And so he projected a rather unnerving image of a man who made himself erotically attractive to everyone. So that was quite a shock, I think. So he never seemed to quite fit, but at the same time it's interesting that the press and the media were mad to pin him down, and once he started to play films with Elisabetta Girelli, who happened to become one of his closest, most intimate friends, rumours of their impending marriage never ended, not really until Clift died. I mean, the media was so obsessed with sort of pinning him down in some sort of heteronormative relationship.
There are many parallels with how Clift was talked about in the 1950s, and coverage of celebrities today. There's an obsession with every detail of people's lives. Recent tabloid coverage of actress Kristen Stewart's holiday with a female friend sent rumours flying that Stewart is a lesbian, with no other context than that the pair were photographed holding hands. At the same time, though, it's important that there have been changes, both in real life and on screen.
We think that today we are so, we've had these ideas for the first time, but actually it's amazing when you go back in history to think someone actually thought about that and made a film about it in 1919. You see the past has been kind of closer. There's a wonderful documentary which goes up to the early 90s, I think, called The Celluloid Closet, very funny film actually, that shows from the beginning of film how gay subtexts were clearly weaved into the main film, and then how openly gay characters started to be represented. And it's interesting because it ends at the early 90s with films like Philadelphia, which were very groundbreaking, of course. I think now we have moved a long way from there. I think that's because there's a mutual relationship between cinema and culture. I still think there are some aspects of sexuality which, as in culture, they're not spoken about in films. In particular, I'm thinking about asexuality, about people who see themselves as asexual. These people exist. There are, some of us are like that. But when I tried to find a film which dealt with that, I couldn't. That is one of the last remaining taboos in our society. To say, I'm absolutely not interested in sex, I'm not bothered, without getting the reaction, oh, you must be very sick or terribly depressed. But actually there is an asexual community. Someone should make a film about that.
So what can we take away from all this? Girelli's work can encourage us to look more closely at the media we view. How are we encouraged to view the characters that we see portrayed? Why do certain scenes or storylines make us feel uncomfortable? And what does it mean that some of the films she mentioned aren't necessarily Hollywood blockbusters? I'd like to leave you to consider these questions. If you're interested in any of the films and resources that were mentioned in this episode, you can find links to them on our blog.
Thank you.